What if the life you trusted was built on lies from the very beginning? She believed she had it all: love, security, a future she could count on. But behind every promise was a hidden truth, and behind every smile, a carefully guarded secret. When reality finally breaks through, it doesn't just shake her world, it destroys everything she thought she knew.
Please.
But in that
I'm trying my
destruction,
best.
something powerful awakens, because she refuses to stay a victim. She rises, stronger, wiser, and ready to reclaim what was always hers. This isn't
have
just
to
a
see
story
this
of
right
betrayal.
now.
It's a story of awakening, resilience,
It's about
and
your
unstoppable
brother.
strength. The lesson? The truth may hurt, but it also sets you free. Trust is earned, not given blindly. And sometimes losing everything is exactly what you need to rebuild something stronger. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and support the channel. Your support is what keeps us going and helps us bring more powerful stories like this. Thanks for watching.
The shared tablet was still lit up on the marble countertop when Maya found it. There was no screaming match, no tearful confession, just a digital menu left open by mistake. It was titled Napa Sourcing, but inside, among notes on wine pairings, was a detailed itinerary. It wasn't for a business trip, it was a romantic getaway for her husband, Ethan, and his star sommelier, Olivia. They were scheduled for private tastings, dinners at secluded restaurants, and nights in a suite with a fireplace. Her entire world didn't crumble over 30 minutes. It evaporated in the 3 seconds it took to open that file. She had been with Ethan for a decade. She was 8 weeks pregnant with their first child. She had built her career editing his cookbooks, crafting his public image. She thought they were a partnership. She was wrong. They planned this behind her back during late-night inventory checks. They were curating a new future for him, one secret reservation at a time. He told her he was meeting with vintners. He told her he was perfecting a new menu, but there was one ingredient his perfect plan didn't account for, one detail he could never have known. She was carrying the legacy he never intended, and her resolve was simmering, reducing down to its most potent form. By the time he noticed she was missing, she had already plated her exit. By the time he came searching, she was already creating something he could never critique, never finance, and never take credit for: a life without his name on the menu. This is the story of a woman who lost her world in a single tap and the feast she made from the ashes in the days that followed. This will absolutely shatter your heart. It holds a lesson and immense value. This story is more than just about an affair. It's about that exact moment a woman realizes her own recipe for life is the only one she can trust. It's a powerful truth that your worth isn't determined by the person who betrays you. It's forged in the strength you discover in the aftermath. No shared kitchen, no glowing reviews, no famous last name can keep you hostage unless you hand over the keys. And sometimes, the 5-star life you thought you wanted has to burn to the ground to light the way to the one you truly need. If this story spoke to you, if it reminded you of your own resilience or the strength of someone you love, drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were Maya? Smash that like button if you believe a woman's greatest creation is her own life. Share this with anyone who needs a reminder of their power today. And if you're new here, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a powerful story. We serve up new ones every week, and trust me, the next one is a story you will not want to miss. Her world didn't end with a clash of pans, but with the quiet, devastating tap of a finger on a screen. Olivia, her husband's sommelier, her name was on every reservation. She looked like she belonged among the vineyards of Napa, which in a sense she did. She belonged in that moment. She belonged to the secret. She belonged to the man beside her, the one Maya had woken up next to that very morning. Maya was still in her favorite worn-out hoodie, the one splattered with faint stains from recipe testing, from a time long before she knew what it felt like to build a future with someone who was secretly planning another one without her. She stared at the screen, reading it over and over. The words felt like a typo, a server error. They couldn't be real. "What is this?" Maya whispered to the empty brownstone. Ethan's name next to hers on the screen was a gut punch, tap. A reservation for a couple's massage. Tap. A note about Olivia's favorite champagne. Tap. A countdown to the end of her life as she knew it. She thought of their business account, the money they were saving for their next restaurant, for the baby's future. $500,000. His texts from his sourcing trip were still fresh on her phone. Every thinking of you was a lie. Every wish you were here to taste this was a betrayal. His deception was so masterful, so perfectly executed, it left no room for doubt. The message was clear. You were never part of this pairing. The silence that followed was a thick, unseasoned sauce. It filled the gourmet kitchen, buzzed in her ears, and settled on her heart like a cold stone. Ethan. She had to hear his voice, to hear him deny it. He was supposed to be in Napa, a quick trip to meet suppliers. He'd kissed her goodbye at dawn. She remembered his scent, strong coffee, and a hint of smoked paprika. "I'll call you after service," he'd promised. He never did. Maya grabbed her phone from the counter, her hands feeling disconnected from her body. She could see them trembling, which was strange because the rest of her felt like it was flash frozen. She called Ethan's number, the one saved under My Everything. It rang twice, then went to his polished voicemail. "You've reached Ethan. Leave a message." She tried again. Same result. Same confident, oblivious voice. A new kind of fear began to rise. She sent a text. "We need to talk, now." The 3 little dots appeared, then vanished. Appeared, then vanished. He was composing, then deleting, protecting his narrative, protecting her. Maya stared at the name on the screen. Olivia, poised, elegant, with hair the color of a perfect Chardonnay. She looked like an advertisement for effortless sophistication. She looked like the woman who had stolen her husband. Ethan would never just leave me, Maya thought. But the itinerary was right there. He had already left, one reservation at a time, one lie at a time. And by the time she discovered it, he was gone, and their story, their brand, was a complete fabrication. The intercom buzzed from the lobby, a soft, polite chime. A delivery of specialty flour she'd forgotten she ordered. The sound meant the world was still turning, even if hers had stopped. Maya looked around their home. A decade of her life was in this space. Her cookbooks on the shelves, her favorite apron on a hook, a framed photo of her and Ethan at a food festival, laughing at something she could no longer find amusing. She opened the hall closet and pulled out the old leather weekender she used for short trips. It had a faint, comforting smell of yeast from a baking class they took in their first year together. She started packing in a trance. The glowing tablet on the kitchen island watched from a distance, a silent witness to the dismantling of a life. 20 minutes. That's how long it took Maya to pack up a decade. 20 minutes for her clothes, 3 for her toiletries, 1 for her most cherished cookbook. She left the expensive jewelry. She left the designer handbag Ethan had bought her for their anniversary. She left the professional-grade stand mixer on the counter. She took the photo from the food festival. She took her grandmother's worn-out apron. She took the ridiculous world's best foodie mug her best friend Liam had given her. The business account, she thought, looking at her banking app. Let him have it, she decided. She didn't want his money. It felt contaminated, part of the lie. Something flickered in her reflection on the dark phone screen. Not sorrow, but a spark of defiance. "You are making a huge mistake," she could almost hear Ethan saying. Maybe, she thought, but it will be my own recipe. She walked to the front door, past the perfectly organized spice racks and the culinary awards that lined the walls, past the life they had built that now felt like a television set. She opened the door. The hallway air felt different, muted, heavy. It was an overcast day, and the light in the hallway seemed weak. She walked to her car parked down the block, the reliable hatchback she'd had since before he was famous. It looked small and unassuming next to the line of luxury cars. She tossed the weekender in the back, got in, and turned the key. And then she looked up at their brownstone window, 3rd floor. The lights were on. She imagined him there, maybe not now, but soon, with Olivia. He would bring her to their home, a place where Maya's things still were, where her presence still lingered in the air. He was 35 years old and had built an empire on authentic ingredients, all while the foundation of his own life was a fraud. He was probably smiling, not the weary smile he gave Maya after a long shift, but the smug smile of a man who thought he had created the perfect dish. Maya felt a cold, sharp clarity move through her. Not grief, not yet. It was a primal understanding that she had been living in a beautifully staged production, and the director himself had just handed her a revised script. Her car pulled away from the curb, blending into the city traffic. The click of her turn signal as she rounded the corner was quiet but final. A plastic tick, dull, absolute. She drove for nearly an hour before she pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store, a brightly lit island of normalcy. She sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel. 10 and 2, just like her dad taught her. She checked her phone, unlocked it, stared at Ethan's last text, sent that morning at 6:15 a.m. "Have a great day, my love. Kill that chapter." She locked the phone, unlocked it, read it again, locked it, unlocked it, searched for a typo, a hesitation, a crack in the performance. There was nothing. She tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and just sat in the quiet hum of the engine. A young couple pushed a cart full of groceries past her car. A group of friends laughed as they walked toward the entrance. She didn't cry. God, she wanted to. But the tears felt useless, trapped behind a wall of pure, undiluted shock. She was 32 years old. She had a leather weekender bag, a car with a half-empty tank of gas, and absolutely no idea what was on the menu for tomorrow. She shifted the gear into drive. The trip to Jessica's French Quarter apartment was a 45-minute crawl through downtown traffic. Sarah didn't play the news podcast she always had on. She ignored the buzz of a text coming in from her editor. She moved through the city in a silent cocoon, watching the streetlights blink from green to yellow to red, a steady tempo that felt alien to the storm raging in her mind. Jessica opened the door before Sarah's knuckles even touched the wood. She must have been watching from her wrought iron balcony as Sarah's car circled for a space. Jessica was like that, always observant. She took in Sarah's appearance, her pale face, the overnight bag gripped tightly in her hand. Jessica didn't press for details. She didn't gasp or whisper a shocked question. She just wrapped her arms around her sister and pulled her inside. "The spare room's ready for you," Jessica said softly. "Fresh sheets. I'm ordering a shrimp po' boy in 10 minutes and you're going to eat every last bite." Sarah could only nod, the words caught in her throat. She collapsed onto the velvet couch. Jessica sat beside her, a steady, comforting weight in the quiet room. For what felt like an hour, neither of them spoke. The apartment smelled of roasted chicory and gardenias. Below the window, the murmur of the city was a constant, gentle hum. A distant saxophone riff faded into the New Orleans night as another week bled into the next. Sarah felt like she was wading through a dream. Time had warped, each second stretched thin and transparent. The days were a hazy cycle of waking and sleeping. She'd rise from bed only when her sister Jessica gently insisted. She would eat the food Jessica put on the table. Most nights, she lay staring at the intricate patterns of the pressed tin ceiling, convincing herself they were maps leading to a world that no longer felt real. She tried to work. As a freelance journalist, she had a reputation for digging up stories no one else could, a portfolio filled with hard-hitting investigative pieces. In the first week, she drafted pitches for 4 different articles. She received 2 excited replies, which she then failed to follow up on. Calls from her editor, which once thrilled her, now went straight to voicemail, each one ending with a concerned, "Sarah, just let me know you're okay." Friends who texted to check in got vague one-word replies. One editor, who was waiting on a feature about the city's changing culinary scene, finally sent a firm but kind email. "Sarah," it said, "I'm going to have to assign this to someone else. Please take care of yourself." The story had been her passion project, an almost guaranteed cover feature. Something was holding her back. It was the memory of Liam's face, the image of him turning away during their last fight, an invisible, suffocating weight she couldn't shake. On the 15th day, Sarah woke to a gut-wrenching wave of nausea. She stumbled to the bathroom, her body heaving as she held on to the cold pedestal sink. It was the stress, she told herself. Her body was just rebelling against the past 2 weeks, against the nights without sleep, the unanswered texts, and the thick, suffocating anxiety that had settled deep in her bones. The sickness came back the next morning, and again the day after. On the third morning, Jessica stood in the bathroom doorway, arms crossed, watching Sarah rinse her mouth with water. "When was the last time you had your period?" Jessica asked, her tone soft but pointed. Sarah stopped, her hand frozen midair. "I have no idea," she whispered. "Think hard." Sarah's memory was a blur of deadlines, late-night dinners with Liam, and the stinging final memory of him grabbing his keys and walking out. But through the noise, a date surfaced. Their anniversary, 6 weeks ago. No, it had to be more like 8. 8 weeks, Sarah breathed, the number sounding like it belonged to someone else. Jessica left the room without a word, returning 20 minutes later with a small paper bag from the pharmacy down the street. Inside were 3 boxes, each a different brand of pregnancy test. Jessica was never one to take chances. Sarah used all 3. She sank to the cool tile floor, her back against the wall, wrapping her arms around her knees as the 3 small plastic sticks sat on the marble countertop, silently deciding her fate. The bathroom fan hummed, a low, constant drone. 3 minutes. The box promised a result in 3 minutes, a tiny window of time that felt like a lifetime. She eventually made herself stand up and look. 1 blue cross, a second blue cross, and a third, a perfect, soul-crushing trifecta that left no room for denial or false hope. Sarah stayed on the bathroom floor for a long time afterward, not sure if minutes or hours had gone by, long enough for the sun to move across the sky and spill through the frosted glass, long enough for Jessica to tap on the door and ask, "Everything okay in there?" "I'm pregnant," Sarah said, her voice sounding strangely distant against the tile. She wasn't just telling Jessica, she was telling the fan, the universe, and whatever cruel force in the cosmos had a sense of humor this dark. 8 weeks pregnant with Liam Harrison's child. The man whose texts were now filled with hollow questions like, "Are we ever going to talk?" The man who was probably, at that very moment, tasting a new sauce at his restaurant with his protégée, Isabella. She buried her face in her hands, a sob catching in her throat. "I was so stupid," she mumbled into her hands. The signs had been there for months. The exhaustion she'd chalked up to his long hours at the restaurant. The new expensive cologne he'd started wearing. The way he always angled his phone away from her when a certain food blogger's messages popped up. She lowered her hands and stared at the 3 tests, lined up on the counter like an accusation. "I have to tell him." Jessica appeared at the door, her expression unreadable. It was the look she got when she was holding back her own fury. "And what exactly are you going to say?" Jessica asked. "His excuse is always that he's at the restaurant, and you know he'll never talk about personal things while he's working." "I'll go there," Sarah said, the idea taking root. "I'll go to the restaurant tonight. He can't ignore me if I'm standing right in front of him." But maybe he could. That afternoon, Sarah sat with Jessica's laptop, her hands shaking. She typed Isabella's name into the search bar of a social media site. Her profile was public, a curated gallery of perfect meals and artistic food shots. And there, posted just 2 days ago, was a picture. It was a close-up of Isabella's hand resting on a restaurant table, a glass of wine in her fingers. Around her neck was a delicate, custom-made gold locket shaped like a chili pepper. Sarah knew that locket. She had helped Liam design it with a local jeweler weeks ago for what he'd said was a very special surprise. The caption read, "The most thoughtful gifts come from the heart." Below it, a comment from Liam's personal account. a single red heart emoji. The world tilted on its axis. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs, her own reflection staring back from the dark screen. She didn't know the woman with the hollowed-out eyes and pale skin. She switched tabs and logged into their shared credit card account. She didn't need to look for long. Charge after charge at high-end jewelry stores, florists, and boutique hotels she had never been to. She scrolled deeper into Isabella's feed, a gallery of their stolen life. Pictures taken at a jazz club Liam had always called their spot. A selfie of Isabella wearing Liam's favorite university sweatshirt, the one he always wore on lazy Sundays. A video of her laughing at a joke Sarah had heard him tell 100 times. This wasn't just an affair, it was a hostile takeover of her life. It was as if someone was methodically replacing her, piece by piece, memory by memory, and they were broadcasting their victory for the whole world to see. That evening, Sarah lay in the guest room, watching the city lights flicker outside the window. She placed a hand over her still flat stomach. "I'm going to be a mother," she whispered to the empty room. A mother to the child of a man who was building a second life behind her back. A mother in a city that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was Liam. A text message, short and oblivious, flashed on the screen. She expected anger, confusion, anything but this. "Hey, got your message you're staying with Jess," it read. "Hope you're not still mad. Thinking of making that shrimp etouffee you love tonight. Come home?" The casual, clueless cruelty of it was a slap in the face. It was the final push she needed. He thought she was just mad. He had no idea she knew. He had no idea that while he was offering to cook her favorite meal, she was looking at a picture of his mistress wearing a locket he had designed with his wife's help. Sarah's fingers tightened around the phone, the screen casting a pale light on her determined face. The pulse in her throat was a steady, rhythmic drum. In, out, in, out. Each breath felt like it was sharpening her resolve. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to hide. She was a journalist, and she had her story. "I'm not coming home," she vowed to the darkness. "I'm coming to you." I promised myself I would never be the woman who begged. Not for anyone, and certainly not for him. The coffee shop was called The Daily Note, a warm little place just a few blocks from Liam's new restaurant, tucked between a dusty record store and a flower shop. It was where the city's musicians came for caffeine, a room filled with the quiet murmur of conversations about auditions and rehearsals. Amelia arrived with time to spare, choosing a green tea which earned a raised eyebrow from the barista. "Tea?" he mouthed silently. "Long night," Amelia whispered back, forcing a smile. "Long life." She took a seat in a worn velvet armchair in the corner, a view of the bustling Chicago street outside. A cyclist weaved through traffic. A couple argued over a parking spot. Life just kept happening, completely unaware. At 10 o'clock sharp, the bell above the door jingled. Lara stepped inside, her confidence a tangible thing, the kind of self-assurance that made the entire room feel a little less significant. She surveyed the cafe, her eyes landing on Amelia with unnerving precision. She wore a simple black dress that probably cost more than Amelia's cello bow. Her hair was perfect. Her smile was a weapon. Amelia had seen her once before, a fleeting glimpse in the soft light of Liam's restaurant, laughing at something he'd said, a sommelier tasting wine with the chef. The perfect pairing. "Thank you for meeting me," Lara said, her voice low and smooth. She didn't move to sit, just rested her leather-gloved hands on the back of the empty chair across from Amelia. "Sit down, Lara," Amelia said, her own voice surprisingly firm. "You wanted this meeting, so talk." Lara sat, her posture impeccable. She didn't order anything. "I don't want to hurt you," Lara began, which Amelia thought was precisely what someone intending to cause immense pain would say. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a warning shot. "I don't want to hurt you," she repeated, "but I won't be a secret." Laura then spent the next 20 minutes dismantling Amelia's marriage, not with anger, but with a calm, surgical precision. She spoke of the night Liam finalized the lease for his restaurant, Ember. Amelia had been at a symphony rehearsal. Laura had been with him, sharing a bottle of vintage champagne he'd been saving. She recounted the story of the small burn scar on his left wrist, a story Liam had always told Amelia happened when he was a teenager. Laura knew the truth. It happened 6 months ago when a pan of searing scallops had flared up in his test kitchen with her standing right beside him. Laura described his creative process, the way he sketched out menu ideas on cocktail napkins, the way he hummed off key when he was concentrating on a new sauce. She knew his anxieties about the food critics, his secret ambition to earn a Michelin star within 2 years. These weren't just facts. They were moments, textures of a life Amelia was supposed to be sharing. They were building a fortress of intimacy, brick by painstaking brick, and Amelia had just discovered she was on the outside of the walls. Laura mentioned the tiny antique silver locket he kept in his bedside table. She said he'd shown it to her just last week, explaining that it had belonged to his grandmother. Amelia felt the air leave her lungs. The warmth of her teacup suddenly felt like ice. That was my gift to him. I found it in a little shop in Prague on our honeymoon. I told him to keep it safe. I know, Laura said softly, as if reading her mind. I know it was from you. He told me. He said it was a beautiful piece, but that the story attached to it felt like it belonged to another lifetime. Another lifetime. Amelia's hands trembled. The name hung between them in the quiet coffee shop, a single phrase that felt more violent than a scream. Lara delivered the final blow. He and I were in Napa for a week last month, sourcing for the wine list. That's when you called him with the news about the baby. Amelia closed her eyes and the cafe vanished. The scent of coffee and steamed milk was replaced by the smell of fresh soil and summer rain from 4 years ago. It was a Saturday morning at the Lincoln Park Farmers Market. A chef with intense eyes and flour on his cheek was passionately arguing with a farmer about the sugar content of his heirloom tomatoes. He spoke about food with the fervor of a composer, and she was captivated. She'd interrupted them, asking if a tomato could ever really be worth a 10-minute debate. He'd turned, a little startled, then intrigued. "What's your name?" "Liam. Does that mean something to you?" "Only that you're the chef from that article about rising stars." He almost winced. "That's what most people say. I make it a point not to be impressed by what other people write. That is a relief." "You're going to make me earn it then?" He looked at her, truly looked, not as a fan or another face in the crowd, but as a person. "You haven't asked for my name," he'd pointed out. "Should I have? It would be a start. I'm not always great with starts, and your name won't change the fact that you just compared a vegetable to a symphony." He had laughed, a real, unguarded laugh. "Fair enough. Can I at least know the name of the woman who thinks my passion for produce is ridiculous?" "Amelia." "Amelia." "Okay, Amelia. Since you're clearly not impressed by my culinary credentials, what would it take to let me cook you dinner?" "Liam, you have a line of 10 people waiting to buy your bread. How about you start by selling them some sourdough? Is that a no?" "That's a not right now." He found her the following week at an open-air concert in the park, carrying a picnic basket filled with bread, cheese, and a bottle of wine. "I don't have any tomatoes to defend this time," he said, "so you have no professional reason to turn me down." She had said yes. Their first date wasn't at some trendy restaurant. It was a picnic on the grass, listening to a string quartet. A date Liam had planned after she mentioned her love for classical music. He'd said, "Perfect. I'm tired of places where the noise is louder than the conversation." They sat on a blanket, watching the sunset behind the city skyline. He'd packed a dessert he'd made himself, a lemon tart that was just a little burnt around the edges, and she hadn't mentioned it because the imperfection made it feel honest in a way she couldn't articulate. He told her about growing up in a loud family kitchen, The pressure to be better, to be perfect, the feeling of chasing a ghost. You listened to me like you could actually hear the music behind the words, he'd said. You saw me as just a man trying to create something, not the next big thing. Those memories were now a cruel mirage in the coffee shop, a film playing on a loop she couldn't stop. Was any of it real? If he could build a whole other life in the margins of their own, was he ever truly hers? Or was he always the chef first, and her husband second? Lara was watching her, her expression unreadable. Why are you telling me this? Amelia asked, her voice cracking. Because he made me a promise. He told me he'd leave you after the restaurant's opening night. She was being groomed not as a partner, but as a replacement. And I thought I could wait. I thought, he's brilliant. He's passionate. This is the life I want. Lara paused, a flicker of something almost like regret in her eyes. But then she met my gaze, her own expression hardening. But I listened to him talk about you, about the baby, and he spoke about it like it was a complication, a problem to be managed. And I realized that if he could describe his own child that way, then what would I become to him someday? The minute I'm no longer the exciting part of his story, I become you. Amelia nodded, not in forgiveness, but in a cold, horrifying clarity. The shared experience of two women who had loved different versions of the same man. What do you want? Amelia whispered. Nothing from you. I just believe a woman should know what kind of man she's having a child with. The truth is yours now. Do what you want with it. Lara slipped on her gloves, left a $20 bill on the table, and walked out. Amelia was alone. Her tea was ice cold. A barista was wiping down the counter. The morning sun streamed through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. She looked out at the street. A delivery truck was unloading flowers, vibrant bursts of color. The driver was laughing with the shop owner. The woman laughed, throwing her head back, while the man just watched her, smiling. Amelia stared for a second too long, feeling a pang for that simple, uncomplicated joy. The specific ease of two people existing in the same moment, on the same page. She looked away, picked up her cup, and drank the cold tea. That night, she was in her apartment at 3 a.m. The glow from her music stand cast a lonely circle of light in the dark room. The faint scent of rosin and old wood hung in the air. She sat on her bench, her cello resting against her, staring at a page of Bach, but the notes were just black marks on a page. The lie spun around and around in her head, a dizzying, sickening melody. The quiet hum of the city, the scent of her instrument, the weight of the life she had built. A concert program lay on the table, 6 months old, from a performance she had been so proud of. She placed a hand on her stomach, on the gentle curve that was still her secret, but it was real as the hollow ache in her heart, as real as the polished wood of her cello, as real as the tiny, innocent life that was, in this moment, growing. Her life. Sleep had become a foreign concept to Nora. She floated in a gray space between wakefulness and memory, where the past few weeks played on an endless, agonizing loop. But through the fog, her mind was finally clearing. It was sharper than it had been in years. The suffocating blanket of heartbreak was being burned away, not because the pain was gone, but because a colder, harder emotion was crystallizing in its place. Purpose. It wasn't the kind of purpose that screamed or shattered glass. It was the quiet, dense kind that settles into your marrow and whispers, find the flaw, identify the stress point, and apply pressure. She began with the data. Not the falsified reports Ethan had shown her, but her own research notes. She was a curator. Her entire professional life is built on provenance and meticulous records. Her mentor at the museum had taught her that artifacts can be faked, but the historical record never lies if you know how to read it. Nora opened her encrypted drive, pulling up every email, every data query, every note she had ever exchanged with Ethan about his project over the last 2 years. She arranged them on her monitor, creating a timeline of her unwavering support. Then she recalled something Catherine had said. A deep archive, board-level clearance. She remembered Ethan once talking about the lab's raw data server, a digital vault for their clinical trial. He'd given her access long ago, and the password hint was the name of the obscure poet they both loved, Rilke. She found the login portal. She typed it in, access granted. With every search query, Ben's forensic software uncovered a more sickening truth. He had found ghost fragments in the server logs, showing how someone had remotely accessed the primary dataset. The audit trail showed modifications to patient response data, subtly skewing the results of Ethan's new cancer drug trial. Years of work meticulously falsified to point directly at Nora's guest account, but the timestamps were impossible. Two of the most significant data alterations occurred while Nora was offline, giving a lecture at a symposium in Philadelphia. She knew this because she had her plane tickets and the university's press photos to prove it. And then Ben found the whisper in the system, a trace of the remote user's device signature. It had been bounced through a half-dozen proxies, but one fragment remained. It pointed to a standard-issue tablet assigned to the lab's junior research fellows. It took them nearly 8 hours and 2 entire carafes of coffee, but they found it. By cross-referencing the device's unique network ID with the lab's internal equipment logs, which Ben acquired through a very gray legal loophole, they found a name, Simone, Ethan's brilliant new protege. Nora collapsed onto Ben's sofa, the room tilting around her. The floor was a sea of printed code and network diagrams. Ben's dog, a beagle named Watson, was nosing at a discarded power cable. This was the evidence. Simone had used her lab-issued tablet to manipulate the trial data, making it look like it came from Nora's account, and then built a careful narrative of sabotage, presenting it to Ethan as a soul-crushing betrayal. It wasn't just a lie, it was an act of academic vandalism, constructed with a sociopath's precision and the unique hubris of someone who believed they were intellectually superior to everyone around them. Yet the motive remained a glaring puzzle. Simone wasn't struggling. She had a research grant and a family with deep pockets. She had a fast-tracked career at one of Boston's top biotech firms. She drove a brand new Tesla and lived in a slick condo in the Seaport district. She had no reason to destroy Ethan's work. The answer came the next day. Ben, now powered by a cold fury, had kept digging. He found Simone's private, locked-down research blog. Over takeout Thai, he pushed his laptop across the table. Nora scrolled, her pad CU going cold. The blog was a disturbing monument to Ethan, candid photos of him in the lab, staring intently at a microscope. Lengthy, worshipful essays dissecting his research methodology. And then there were the posts about her. Cruel, envious attacks veiled as concern. His work is being held back by a partner who operates in the past, one post read. He needs a collaborator, not a historian. The jealousy was a toxic vapor rising from the screen. This wasn't about a career, it was about succession. Simone didn't want Ethan's job. She wanted his entire existence, with herself installed in Nora's place. The apartment felt like it was shrinking, the air thinning out. Nora's hand instinctively went to her stomach. "When is Ethan's presentation to the review board?" Nora asked, her voice a fragile thread. Ben checked his phone. "Next week. If the data holds, the drug gets fast-tracked. He becomes a giant in the field." Nora pushed her plate away. The food looked like ash. Simone wasn't just trying to frame her or end their marriage. She was trying to methodically excise her from Ethan's life right before his greatest victory, positioning herself as the one who could help him recover from the devastation. As long as Nora was with Ethan, especially with their child on the way, she was the anchor to his world. And that anchor was blocking a future Simone believed was rightfully hers. She wasn't just being betrayed, she was being systematically erased. The baby inside her was the living proof of a life Simone was determined to rewrite. The thought was like being plunged into a frozen lake. If she finds out I'm pregnant, the baby makes my position permanent, and that makes us a threat. She looked over at Ben, who was watching her with deep concern. "I can't tell anyone. Not Ethan. Not until I know what she'll do next." She told two people, Ben and her older sister, Catherine. She called Catherine on a Thursday night, knowing her sister, a federal prosecutor, would still be at her desk in Washington, D.C. Catherine would be reviewing a deposition, the lights of the Capitol glowing behind her, as she did most evenings. She answered before the second ring. "Kate," Nora began, her voice shattering, "I need your help." Catherine Russo listened. She didn't interrupt, she didn't gasp, she didn't offer platitudes. She listened with the laser focus of a woman who had indicted congressmen, raised her two younger sisters after their parents' accident, and had never lost a jury trial. When Nora finished, a raw sob catching in her throat, there was a pause just long enough for Nora to hear the faint sound of a distant motorcade through the phone. "I'm postponing my morning depositions," Catherine said, her voice like steel. "I'll be on the first flight out." "Kate, you can't just—" "Nora Elizabeth Russo," Catherine cut her off. "I've spent my career taking down sophisticated criminals. This one will have to wait. You won't." Catherine arrived the following morning. She strode into Ben's apartment carrying a single leather briefcase that cost more than his rent. She surveyed the living room, cluttered with printouts of server logs and personnel files. She looked at Nora. She saw the shadows under her sister's eyes and the way her hands rested protectively on her still flat stomach. She didn't offer a hug. That wasn't her way. Not yet. Instead, she sat at the table, opened her briefcase, and retrieved a government-issued secure tablet. She put on a pair of severe, black-framed glasses that made her look even more intimidating. She had Ben walk her through every piece of digital evidence, her fingers swiping through lines of code and device ID logs. She did this for more than an hour. Nora and Ben sat on the sofa and watched. The only sounds in the apartment were the quiet clicks of Catherine's tablet and the soft snores of Watson, who was asleep on a stack of case files. Finally, Catherine looked up, removed her glasses, and folded them with a sharp, definitive click. "This girl is a rank amateur," she declared with a terrifyingly calm demeanor. "Bright people always are. They confuse academic brilliance with tactical intelligence. It's not the same. It just makes them sloppy." She picked up a stylus and began marking up screenshots, circling procedural errors. The corrupted timestamps, the sloppy data scrubbing, the digital breadcrumbs Simone had failed to erase. "We're going to need a forensics specialist," Catherine stated. "A real one. Someone the Bureau uses for cybercrime cases. Someone who can turn this data into an ironclad legal document." Nora nodded. The cold, heavy dread in her chest was no longer inert. It was catching fire, not into a wild inferno of rage, but into the focused, white-hot flame of action. "I didn't lose Ethan. Simone tried to steal him. There is a difference, and I am taking him back." That night, Nora lay awake, but for the first time in weeks, it wasn't from grief. It was from the quiet hum of a complex plan assembling itself in her mind. She lay in the dark, a hand over her womb, and for the first time since the morning Ethan had looked at her with the eyes of a stranger, she felt something other than broken. She felt a surge of power. 400 miles away, in a hotel suite on the 42nd floor overlooking the Potomac River, Ethan Hayes was nursing a glass of bourbon at 3 p.m. and staring at the Washington Monument without really seeing it. Nora didn't know this. She wouldn't know for months. But one of Ben's contacts at the firm eventually told him, in terse, pained messages, the way you describe watching a controlled demolition, not one big explosion, one piece of the structure failing, then another, each revelation more devastating than the last. Ethan had believed Simone. That was the wound that went deepest. Not that Simone had fabricated a story, but that he had accepted it without reservation, instantly. Simone had come to his office, her expression a mask of manufactured heartbreak. She told him she had discovered something that threatened the entire trial. The evidence was damning, she'd whispered. When confronted, Nora had confessed everything. She'd claimed she felt suffocated by his success, that she was trying to get his attention, that she had already left him. Her exact words were, Simone had told him, her eyes filling with expertly crafted tears, "Tell him I'm sorry, but I needed a life of my own." Ethan had tried to call Nora. The calls went directly to voicemail. Simone said Nora had blocked him, that she didn't want any contact. And Ethan believed it, because why would Amelia lie? She was his star architect, his brilliant and tireless second in command. He could imagine Nina being stressed about the pregnancy. He could picture them arguing, but he couldn't imagine this kind of cruel, paranoid accusation coming from the woman he loved. So he withdrew, the way men do when they've been taught that emotional conflict is a problem to be solved with distance. He worked late, he skipped dinners at home, he would stand on the exposed 22nd floor of the new tower, letting the bitter Boston wind whip at him until his skin was numb, and then stay there even longer as the sun went down. His business partner found him asleep on his office couch twice in 1 week. A career-defining project that would reshape the city's skyline was moving forward on his reputation alone, while he numbly initialed whatever blueprints Amelia slid in front of him. He didn't check the details. At night, in the sterile quiet of his office, he was haunted by Nina. The way she'd chew on her pen while deciphering a historical document. The way she arranged their bookshelves by geographic region, creating a map of the world. The night they tried to assemble a complex shelving unit and ended up laughing so hard they gave up, ordering a pizza and eating it on the floor among the scattered parts. And now, that was all contaminated. Those memories were spoiled, twisted by Amelia's stories of Nina's supposed instability. The woman in them wasn't the woman he was living with. At least, that's what he convinced himself. Nina learned most of this from her sister, who got it from a friend inside the firm. A young intern saw what was happening. He watched Amelia manage a shattered Ethan, her concern so thick and constant it was suffocating. "It's like she's a handler," he texted Nina's sister. "He's a ghost and she's pulling his strings." Nina knew she had to reach him, but not through any channel Amelia could monitor. A text could be twisted. A call could be presented as harassment. She needed to show him something undeniable. Working with her sister and a tech-savvy cousin, she didn't write a letter. They built a file. They compiled everything onto a simple, password-protected website. A digital record of the truth. It had office keycard logs showing Amelia in the building on weekends. It had screenshots of Amelia's private social media, full of obsessive posts about her mentor. It had airline ticket receipts showing Amelia had been on the same flights as Ethan to London and Dubai for his solo work trips. It had a sworn statement from a former coworker Amelia had forced out. It was an organized, irrefutable timeline of the entire calculated affair. Nina typed out a single email, pasted the link, and wrote a subject line with 2 words, "The truth." The evidence of Amelia's deception, the routing of company funds for her travel expenses, the forged project notes that made it seem like she was doing the work Nina had actually helped research. She didn't beg or plead. She drafted one direct email. She attached the link to the evidence, clear, documented, verifiable proof. And at the end, she wrote one personal line. "I never cared about the Sterling Tower. I never cared about the awards. I wanted the man who stood in a university library and was reminded of his own history. If that man is still there, he will know this is the truth." She sent it to his primary work email in Boston. She knew he checked it religiously, a habit formed years ago when they were first dating. The email arrived in his inbox 4 days later. A rule set up by someone with delegate access flagged it instantly. It looked at the sender's address, then at a filter created by a user with access to Ethan's account. A filter that offered a direct path to the trash folder for any correspondence from Nina Hayes. The email was rerouted. 40 minutes later, a notification popped up on a different laptop. It was delivered not to Ethan's computer, but to a trash folder accessed on a laptop in a coffee shop 2 blocks away. Amelia's laptop. Amelia read the email, all of it. She read it while sitting at a small table, sipping a latte and looking out at the bustling street. Then she saw the attachments detailing the secret trips. She set down her cup, permanently deleted the message, and then emptied the trash folder for good measure. "We have a problem." Nina didn't know the email had been intercepted. She waited. 1 day, 2, 5, a week. She refreshed her sent items. She checked her phone. She stared at the blank space where a reply should have been. Nothing. He isn't coming. He saw the proof, he knows the truth, and he chose her. That was the thought that finally cracked her spirit. Not the lies, not the career sabotage, not the fact that she was pregnant and alone. The thought that Ethan held the truth in his hands and simply let it go. She didn't know he never saw it. She didn't know it was deleted from existence, erased between a zoning variance and a lunch order. She didn't know, and the not knowing was the most brutal part of the deception. A week after the argument, Nina's world fractured on a screen. It was an article, a single glowing feature on a prominent Boston Business Journal's website. Her husband, Ethan, the city's star architect, with his arm wrapped confidently around Amelia, his protege. The headline was a gut punch, the power duo building Boston's future. A friend with a sympathetic text had sent it to her. Nina scrolled through the article, a tidal wave of quotes from industry leaders and anonymous sources praising their perfect partnership. They called her the academic wife, out of her depth. They speculated on the state of her life based on one carefully crafted PR piece. Her own reputation, built on meticulous research and integrity, began to feel fragile. A museum that had been in talks with her for a curatorial role sent a vague email. "We've decided to pause the hiring process for now." Amelia's influence was insidious and far-reaching. Within 2 days, the gossip hardened into an accepted story. Nina Hayes, the brilliant historian who couldn't even hold on to her own husband. Nina sat on a stool in her university archives, the relentless buzz of the online chatter still ringing in her ears. She didn't feel rage or even despair. What settled in was a deep, hollowing exhaustion, the kind that makes your limbs feel heavy and the simple act of breathing feel like a chore. She pushed her laptop away, closing the lid. She walked over to a flat-file cabinet, to the delicate 18th century city plan she was restoring. She picked up a soft brush, dipped it in a cleaning solution, and began to work. The methodical, patient task of lifting away 2 centuries of grime to find the original ink beneath had always been her sanctuary. The faint, earthy scent of old paper filled the quiet room, a welcome escape from the city's noise. With painstaking care, she worked on a small corner of the map, watching as a sliver of a long-forgotten street name emerged from a sea of brown. The focused intensity of her work, the quiet whisper of the brush, the slow, deliberate reveal of truth from decay. It was a form of prayer. Then, a sudden, firm thump from within. The baby kicked. It wasn't a gentle flutter this time, but a real, solid, undeniable press of a tiny heel against her side. It was a message in a language older than time. "I am here." Nina instinctively placed a hand over her belly, catching her breath. The archive was silent save for the hum of the climate control. A small, secret smile touched her lips. Not because the world was right, but because she was creating something far more real than the ruins Ethan had made of their life. 5 months. That was the number she held on to. 5 months of a life growing inside her while her own life came apart. She had just won a major research grant, the kind of project that promised stability through the year ahead. But just as she was laying a new foundation, her body began to revolt. It began with a pressure in her skull, a relentless headache that felt like a vice tightening. Then her hands swelled, and tiny dark spots started to float across her vision like flecks of ash. She knew. Even before her doctor, Maria Flores, said the word, she knew, preeclampsia. It was early, they had caught it, but it was a serious threat. "Strict bed rest," Dr. Flores said, her voice kind but absolute. "Starting today? Not after you finish your notes. Now." "I can't," Nina pleaded. "I have a grant, a timeline. I don't get paid if I don't work." "Nina, if your blood pressure gets any higher, you'll be in the hospital. This isn't a negotiation." Nina sat on the crinkling paper of the exam table, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing. She could hear a baby crying in the next room. "My new insurance doesn't kick in for 2 more months. We'll work on that. You need to go home. Home. The apartment filled with his books, his clothes, his ghost. Home, where there was no one to bring her a meal or check her blood pressure or be there if she collapsed. She drove back to the apartment, took the elevator up, and walked into the quiet rooms. The smell of his cologne still lingered in the closet. She sat on the edge of her unmade bed, the silence of the space pressing down on her, making the frantic thoughts in her head feel deafening. She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over her contacts. She scrolled right past Ethan's name, a phantom she refused to chase. She passed the numbers of museum curators, librarians, colleagues, an entire life that was now out of reach. Then she found the number she needed. She pressed the screen. It rang 3 times. Mom? Nina, what is it? What's wrong? How they always knew just from the sound of your voice. I need you. Her mother, Sarah, didn't ask what for. She simply said, I'm closing up the bookstore. I'll be there before morning. Mom, it's a 6-hour drive. Then I'll be there before morning. Don't you even think about arguing. The line went dead. Ava rested her head against the cool glass of the bay window, watching the rain slick the cobblestones of Beacon Hill. Her hand rested on the curve of her belly, where the baby was a soft, tumbling warmth. Something was wrong. For weeks, Julian's excuses about late nights at the restaurant had felt thin, but this was different. A cold dread had settled in her chest. 2 days later, her vision blurred and her head began to pound. Her brother, Leo, insisted on driving her to Mass General, his electric car cutting silently through the deluge. They put her in a room on the maternity ward for observation, room 307. The bed felt like a cage. The steady, digital chime of the fetal heart monitor was a constant, unnerving rhythm, each beat a question mark. Every 15 minutes, the blood pressure cuff tightened its grip on her arm, a mechanical and unforgiving hug. The sanitized air of the room smelled of antiseptic and fear. A nurse, young and briskly kind, came to check her vitals. She tapped on her tablet. And should we have a contact number for the father? Ava glanced at the digital admission form, at the blinking cursor in the box labeled spouse partner. Her fingers felt numb as she typed a single word, none. The nurse's smile was a masterpiece of professional neutrality as she moved on to take her temperature. That night, bathed in the eerie glow of the monitors, Ava found herself navigating the shared cloud drive on her laptop. She'd deleted every personal photo of Julian, but the ghost of their shared digital life remained. The discovery had been sickeningly simple, a business plan full of her own stolen ideas for a new life he was planning with his sommelier, Sophie. Now she was looking at rental listings in Cambridge, 1-bedrooms in neighborhoods she'd only ever heard about. The pictures were grim, galley kitchens with dated appliances, living rooms barely wide enough for a sofa. She'd squint at the screen, trying to picture where a crib might fit. Shoved against a drafty window? In the tiny alcove meant for a dining table? Most of them had no room. No room for a baby, no room for the life she had been so carefully designing. She snapped the laptop shut. The monitor beside her chirped, and the cuff on her arm began its relentless squeeze. The room felt like it was shrinking. At 2:46 in the morning, Leo pushed open the door to room 307. He was wearing his usual gray fleece, which always smelled faintly of server rooms and coffee. He carried a duffel bag, a thermos of something hot, and the focused look of a man who had just spent 6 hours cracking the digital fortress of a very stupid man and would happily do it again. He didn't say anything at first. He put the bag down, placed the thermos on the bedside table, and pulled the visitor's chair close. Then he simply rested his hand on her forearm. His touch wasn't emotional or soft, it was just a point of contact, a solid, grounding presence in her spinning world. And that's when Ava finally shattered. The terrified, angry sob she'd been holding back since she saw the business plan ripped through her, a raw, ragged sound that shook the sterile quiet of the room. It was the sound of a woman who was tired of being composed, of being the planner, of being the adult. Leo didn't say a word. He didn't offer platitudes or promises that it would all be okay. He just sat there, a silent guardian, and let her break because he knew that some disasters are too big for words. And sometimes quiet solidarity is all you have to offer. When Ava's weeping finally quieted into hitched breaths, Leo handed her a bottle of water. "Okay," he said, his voice level. "Now, let's talk about the wire transfers Julian made from your joint savings account." Even here, in the hushed, anxious atmosphere of the hospital, Leo was a man who dealt in data, not drama. Outside, the city lights were smeared into watercolor streaks by the rain. "I'm going to have this baby alone," Ava whispered, the words scraping her throat. "That is the only thing that's real anymore. This baby doesn't know about stolen blueprints or secret LLCs. He just knows my heartbeat, and my heartbeat is getting stronger." She looked at her brother. "He was funneling our money to her," she said. Leo's jaw was tight. "How did you find out? It wasn't just the plans, was it? You found more. He has a whole digital life she was a part of. Shared calendars, financial apps. He knows about the high-risk checkups, and he knows it's a boy." Leo was quiet for a second, the only sound the gentle hum of the medical equipment. Then a thin, cold smile appeared on his face. "Perfect," he said. "A guy that arrogant always leaves a trail." At 7 months pregnant, Ava's temporary apartment in Somerville always smelled of either brewing coffee or the fresh potting soil she used for her balcony herbs. She stood in what she called the baby's alcove. The place was too small for a real nursery, but she'd hung a linen curtain to carve out a space near the window. She was sketching a mural on the wall behind it, a pattern of silver birch trees. Her hair was in a messy bun, and there was a charcoal smudge on her nose. Her ankles were swollen, her back ached constantly, and her obstetrician would have lectured her about taking it easy, but she needed this. The quiet, methodical act of creating a calm, beautiful space in a world that had become chaotic and ugly. Leo had crashed on the pull-out sofa for a bit, which they both understood meant until the baby came. He made sure she ate, he debugged her Wi-Fi, and every afternoon he made calls from her tiny kitchen table. He came back from those calls with legal jargon, strategy notes, and finally, a name. Catherine Rivas. She was 40-something, sharp as a tack, and her downtown office had a panoramic view of the harbor that smelled of success and faint perfume. She wore impeccably tailored suits and drank green tea from a delicate porcelain cup. She had represented the wife in the Sterling Hotel's divorce 2 years ago. She had left the husband with nothing but his last name. "Conflict of interest," she had said with a wry smile when Leo first spoke to her. "That's the official term. The unofficial one is that Julian's father tried to get me disbarred for uncovering his offshore accounts during a previous merger. When that failed, he had to settle. I don't forget things like that." She never gave more details, and Ava didn't need them. Some histories speak for themselves. Leo brought her to the apartment on a Thursday. She sat at the small kitchen table, which was covered in Ava's sketches, and looked at the screen of Leo's laptop. He laid out the case, the original architectural design files from Ava's portfolio with their creation date timestamps, the derivative versions from the Napa business plan, clumsily altered and rebranded, the complete, unedited chain of financial transfers from their joint accounts to Julian's Shell Corporation and then on to vendors in California. Catherine scrolled through every file, every transaction ID, every IP address log Leo had compiled, with the intense concentration of a surgeon examining an X-ray. This was, in its own way, a critical operation. When she finished, she closed the laptop. She looked straight at Ava. "This isn't just an affair," she said, her voice soft but laced with steel. "This is a calculated dissolution of marital assets, and the fact that he used your own intellectual property as the foundation for it, that's not just insult to injury, that's leverage. We aren't just filing for divorce. We're filing an injunction and a suit for damages." The gravity of her words hung in the air. "What's the first step?" Ava asked. "First, we go silent. If Julian gets any idea that you know about the money trail, he'll try to hide it. I'm filing a temporary restraining order on all shared assets tomorrow morning. It will freeze every account he has access to. He won't be able to move a dime. Will that tip him off? Oh, absolutely, Catherine said with a sharp smile. But by the time he figures it out, it will be too late. Ava nodded, looking over at her brother, who stood by the counter, arms crossed. His face was set in an expression of quiet, furious satisfaction. The days that followed were taut with a silence that felt louder than noise. Ava worked on freelance design projects from home. She cooked, she read books about sleep training. She opened a new checking account and deposited a check for $270. It was a start. On a Tuesday afternoon, she went to the local nursery. The greenhouses were warm and humid, and she walked slowly down the aisles, one hand on the small of her back, the other trailing over the leaves of ferns. The baby was active, his little kicks and nudges a private, steady conversation. At the counter, the woman in front of her looked overwhelmed, a toddler propped on her hip. She slid a small potted orchid across the counter. Her card was declined. She tried a second time, declined again. A flush crept up her neck as she fumbled in her purse, the cashier waiting with a practiced patience that was worse than impatience. The woman pushed the orchid aside. Ava picked up an identical orchid and placed it on the counter with her own small bag of soil. In the parking lot, she saw the woman struggling to buckle the toddler into a car seat. "Excuse me," Ava said, holding out the plant. The woman stared at her, then at the delicate purple flowers, then back at Ava's obviously pregnant stomach. "But why?" she asked, her voice thick with confusion. "I know," Ava said with a small smile. "It just looked like you needed something that grows." The woman took the orchid, and for a long moment, their eyes met. No thank you was needed. No explanation was given. It was a moment of dreadful clarity, an unspoken understanding between a woman and the truth she held in her hands. Driving back from the market, the cabin of her SUV smelled of pine-scented air freshener and betrayal. A bland pop song crackled on the radio, but Maya found herself humming along, a strange, detached calm settling over her. That evening, Ethan called from his conference. His voice had a new strain, a forced cheerfulness that felt sharp and brittle. "I was just talking to a new contact at the firm," he started. "Someone I really connect with, who gets the vision. We were brainstorming this new museum proposal." Maya's fingers tightened around her phone until her knuckles were white. The proposal was a lie. He was lying. "And?" she asked, her voice steady. "And I think we're going to land it," Ethan said, the pride in his voice making her stomach turn. "This could be huge for us." Maya closed her eyes, resting her head against the cool tile of the backsplash. The baby gave a sudden, hard kick, a tiny rebellion against the world she was about to bring it into. "I have more news," Ethan went on. "Sophie called me a few hours ago. He gave her a promotion last night." "What?" "He said it was time to build out the team, reward the real talent. His partner's idea," he claimed. "A strong new front for the firm, 2 lead architects, a dynamic duo. It makes the whole stagnant period from last year just fade away." "What did Sophie say?" Maya asked, her voice a ghost of itself. "She said it was the best day of her life, and then she booked a reservation for 2 at Vetri to celebrate." A thick silence filled the line, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. "She wants to help, Maya. She texted me, and I quote, 'Let me know what you need me to do.'" Maya opened her eyes. The cozy little kitchen, with its scent of the lemon chicken she'd made, felt like a fortress. The soft gray elephants she'd painted on the nursery wall seemed to stand guard in the dim light. For weeks, she had been drowning in suspicion, absorbing every excuse, bracing for the next flimsy lie. She'd been playing from a defensive crouch while Ethan rewrote their entire reality. That was finished. "Tell Sophie I need Ethan's personal iPad," Maya said, her tone level and icy. "I need his entire cloud backup, specifically the location history data and the hidden photo albums. Any deleted message archives that would show the timeline." "That's an astronomical risk," her sister said quietly over the phone. She's his protege now. She works at the desk right outside his office. She has access. If she gets caught, her sister warned, it's her career, and it's your entire plan. Then, Maya said, gazing at the small world she had built within those four walls, she'd better be very, very careful. Sophie, her supposed ally at the firm, showed up at her door. She looked nervous, out of place on the quiet suburban street. She wasn't carrying flowers. She was holding a laptop. "Maya, I am so sorry," she whispered, her eyes wide. "You have to see this." She opened the machine. It was a shared design folder for a project Ethan was leading, but buried inside was a video file. It was a screen recording from Ethan's computer. It showed everything. Ethan asking Sophie to research the most exclusive jewelers in the city. Ethan, in a series of drafts, composing a romantic note to another woman, meticulously choosing the perfect words. Ethan, looking at photos of rings on a website and then sending a screenshot to someone named Alicia with the text, "Soon." Her sister had found the file by accident. It wasn't a momentary lapse. It was a carefully planned demolition of their future. From a password-protected folder labeled Austin Retreat came the proof of a much deeper scheme. A full archive of every text, every photo, all 16 gigabytes of it, on a hard drive Sophie had managed to copy. Maya had every word, every sweet nothing Ethan had whispered to Alicia, every shared dream, every single lie, and she downloaded it all. The fabricated travel itineraries were there too, saved in 4 different versions. The first was sloppy, with flight times that didn't match and hotel bookings for the wrong days, the kind of deception that would unravel with a single phone call. The second was better. The third was seamless, expert, and utterly believable. Ethan had rehearsed his betrayal like an actor learning his lines, honing the performance until it was indistinguishable from the truth. And then, the texts. A thread between Ethan and his college roommate, Alex, brief and clinical, the coded language of 2 men who understood the game. Ethan, the new associate, is in. M has no idea. Alex, solid. When is Maya's baby shower? Ethan, end of the month? Get something big. She likes grand gestures. Alex, I always get something big. Maya copied everything to 3 separate drives, one for her own records, one for her divorce lawyer, and one for a bank vault box that only her mother had a key to. She had the Wi-Fi password changed the next morning, a small, strategic move. All of Ethan's access to their smart home, their shared accounts, their digital life, was now cut off. The notification of the password change hit Ethan's phone at 10:32 in the morning, and his assistant later told Sophie that Ethan's face went white as a sheet. Alex found out by lunch, his parents by 3, his mistress by 5, and Ethan, by the next morning, was back in Philadelphia. He stood on the porch of their townhouse, the same home where he had promised Maya forever just 1 year ago. He looked gaunt. The double life had worn him down. His designer suits hung off him. His eyes had the weary, unfocused look of a man who had traded sleep for adrenaline. He called Maya about the internet. She was sitting in the living room with a cup of herbal tea and a book she wasn't reading. A masterclass in normalcy. "It is a complication," Maya said, her voice smooth as glass. "That woman is trying to undermine our marriage. It is what insecure people do." Insecure people. People who don't fit. Ethan stared at his phone, his own tired reflection looking back. He felt like he was 70 years old, withered by his own deceit. He had managed his affair with architectural precision, like a designer who admires the blueprint but never visits the construction site. He had spent their entire marriage seeking her approval and getting, in return, her quiet devotion. "I want to see the messages," he said. "It was the files from the Austin trip, the proof she was coordinating against you. Your friend Alex deleted all of that. Then I want Alex to tell me. Ethan, my love, this is beneath you. Let the lawyers sort it out." But Ethan was already leaving his office, striding through the lobby, out to his car. The car was his sanctuary. Sleek windows, Italian leather, the scent of old coffee and ambition. It was the car where he had driven Maya on crisp autumn evenings. She liked folk music. He liked jazz. They would sit side by side, her hand on his knee, driving in comfortable silence. He drove to the neighborhood where Maya used to have her art studio. Her favorite things were still in the gallery windows. She had left them behind, a series of charcoal sketches, a well-worn book on impressionist painters, and tucked into a sun visor behind a stack of gas receipts was a photograph. Maya and Ethan, on their second anniversary. They were at a vineyard. She was holding up a ridiculously large glass of wine. He was laughing at a joke she'd just told. The photo was taken by a waiter they had befriended. On the back, in her elegant script, was a single line, "Thank you for letting me be me." He stared at the picture for what felt like an hour. The light inside the car faded. Day turned to dusk. The city lights began to blur. He remembered that was her line. The thing she said in the emergency room after he broke his arm, the first thing that made him realize he was in love. "You look at me like you actually get me." Ethan turned the photograph over, studying her face, then his own, the genuine joy in it, the rare kind of joy that comes from being truly seen by someone else. He tried to connect that woman with the one his friend described, the jealous wife, the manipulator, the woman who supposedly said, tell him he got what he deserved. It didn't add up. The two images wouldn't merge, like trying to force together pieces from two different puzzles. He dialed her old cell number, the one he used to call 20 times a day. A robotic voice announced it was no longer in service. He called the realtor for the apartment they had looked at before buying the house. A new family lived there. They'd never heard her name. Every path back to the woman he knew had been systematically erased. Not randomly, but by design. With the cold efficiency of a wrecking ball clearing a foundation. He had never tried to contact her directly after the argument. He let his friend run interference. He trusted him. And they had used that trust like a weapon, aimed directly at him. Sunday brunch, the family home, linen napkins, polished silver, the antique china his mother used for occasions when perception was more important than reality. His father sat at one end, his mother at the other, his brother across from him. The table was set for 12. 4 people made it feel cavernous. Ethan placed his phone on the table, face up. Displayed on the screen was the photograph from the car, Maya and the wine glass, his own laughing face, the handwriting on the back. He didn't shout. He did not bang his fist on the mahogany. He spoke in a low voice, the kind of quiet that precedes a hurricane. "Where is she?" His brother glanced at the phone, his coffee cup hovering over its saucer. Then he took a slow sip. "Who? You know who." His mother dabbed her lips with her napkin. "Ethan, this is hardly the time. Where is Maya? What did you do? And don't you dare lie to me, because I have spent 1 year believing every word you said, and the woman in this picture is not a manipulator." Silence. The kind of silence that suffocates a room. His brother picked at a croissant. His father studied his omelet. His mother fiddled with her necklace. Then his father spoke. The man who hadn't offered a dissenting opinion in 3 decades. The man who signed the checks his wife laid out and attended the gala she planned and performed the role of patriarch like a tired stage actor. His father looked up from his plate, met his youngest son's eyes, and said 6 words that shattered the family's entire fragile performance. "Tell him, Helen, or so help me, I will." His father's expression tightened. His mother looked at her husband, her face doing something Ethan had never witnessed but instantly understood. For a fraction of a second, her perfect composure fractured, like a hairline crack appearing in flawless marble. "Arthur, don't. No, not this time. I let you manage the merger. I let you manage the firm's reputation. I let you manage everything because it was easier than fighting with you. But this, our son is imploding over a deception we created, and now there's a child." That word settled in the room with the weight of a granite block. "What child?" Ethan asked. The silence stretched. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed the hour. She was standing in the middle of what would be her restaurant kitchen when she heard the knock. 8 months pregnant. Exposed brick walls behind her, a 6-burner Vulcan range she'd bought at an auction, still wrapped in plastic, a series of custom pendant lights not yet hung coiled on a nearby countertop. The knock wasn't loud or demanding, just 3 distinct raps, the kind someone makes when they aren't completely sure they found the right address. Her sister, Maya, answered. She opened the heavy steel door just a few inches, peering through the gap like a gatekeeper. Ethan was standing in the corridor. He was wearing a bespoke suit that was worth more than her entire kitchen fit-out. His hair was cut shorter than she remembered. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week and had just discovered the entire foundation of his life was faulty. Maya didn't step aside. "You don't get to come in here and play the hero," she said, her voice low. "She did the saving herself." Ethan opened his mouth, then shut it. He didn't protest. He didn't try to push past her. He just stood there in the hallway, accepting the judgment of a woman he'd never met, who was now blocking his path with the immovable force of a retaining wall. "I know," he said. "I know I'm too late. I know I should have investigated, called more, tried harder. I know all of that. And I know that knowing doesn't change a single thing. So why are you here? Because she deserves to hear the truth from me, not through a lawyer's letter, not from some court filing, from me." Maya studied him for a long moment. She had the piercing gaze of a prosecutor who had spent 15 years dismantling witnesses, the ones who were telling the truth, the ones who were falling apart, the ones who were dangerous, and the ones who were simply lost. She moved aside, not completely, just enough. Olivia emerged from behind her. She was wearing a mismatched collection of comfortable clothes, a faded band t-shirt stretched over her stomach, yoga pants, and fuzzy socks. Her hair was in a messy bun, and her face was free of makeup. It was a state of raw exhaustion that couldn't be faked because it wasn't a performance. She was 8 months pregnant. The reality of it struck Ethan with physical force. It wasn't the abstract concept of a baby anymore. It was the real, tangible, undeniable sight of the woman he loved carrying his child. He was silent for 10 seconds, then 20. A full half-minute of standing in a dusty, half-finished restaurant that smelled of plaster and fresh paint, staring at the woman he'd been told was a manipulative gold digger, and seeing instead the woman who once brought him soup in a thermos when he was pulling an all-nighter at the firm. Olivia. Don't say my name like that. Like it's a blueprint you misplaced and just found again. You didn't misplace me, Ethan. You archived me. There's a world of difference. He winced, a tiny, almost imperceptible motion, but she saw it. She always noticed the details he tried to conceal. "You're right," he said. "I did. I believed their version of the story. Without calling you, without double-checking the source, without doing the one thing I was trained to do, verify the foundation. Why was it so easy for you to believe her?" The question came from Olivia as she leaned against a stainless steel prep table. He looked diminished, stripped of the architectural awards and the arrogance that came with them. "Why did you just accept it?" Olivia pushed a stray strand of hair from her face, her hand resting on her belly. "Believing her was easy, Ethan. You spent the last year obsessed with landing the Seaport contract. You were never home. You left a vacuum, and someone like Simone was thrilled to fill it. That blog post wasn't the weapon. It was just the photograph of the wound." He flinched. "I know. God, do you have any idea how much I know that now? I was an idiot. She exploited every insecurity I had." He took a tentative step into the space. "Part of me wants to throw you out, and the other part knows that if I let you back in, I have to trust that you've learned how to fight for us. And right now, I'm not sure you even know how. And I can't trust you anymore, Ethan. I gave you everything I had, and you handed it over to her like it was a meaningless first draft." Ethan didn't collapse onto a designer sofa in their shared Beacon Hill brownstone. He slid down the exposed brick wall in the restaurant's entryway, his expensive suit bunching up around him. There were no theatrical sobs, just the quiet, crushing weight of a man finally grasping the scale of his own failure. Olivia watched him, the man she had designed a life with, the man who had demolished it, now looking completely defeated in the space she was building for herself. She pulled the heavy steel door closed. It didn't slam, it just made a soft, definitive click as the lock engaged, the quiet finality of a woman who no longer had to shout to be heard. Inside, she leaned her head against the cool metal. Her sister, Maya, was at a makeshift desk, methodically reviewing lease agreements. "He's still out there," Maya said without looking up. "I know. How long are you planning to leave him there?" Olivia's voice was firm. "As long as it takes for me to figure out if I ever want to open this door for him again." The weeks that followed weren't a romance. They were an audit. Ethan didn't beg. He didn't bombard her with melodramatic texts. He didn't show up with flowers or have lawyers send settlement offers. He had a rare, hard-to-source spice blend she'd been trying to find for months, delivered from a specialty importer. He didn't text. Olivia came back from an exhausting day of interviews to find the notoriously difficult restaurant ventilation system, which 3 contractors had failed to fix, had been silently and perfectly serviced by a top commercial specialist. There was no note, no attempt to take credit, just the welcome hum of a working kitchen. He would sit in a coffee shop across the street during her prenatal appointments. She never asked him to join. He never crossed the street. Maya eventually began to acknowledge him with a clipped nod, which for Maya was a tectonic shift in foreign policy. She didn't forgive him, and she didn't trust him, but she did allow the spice delivery, a concession that was the closest she'd get to an olive branch. The downfall of the Harrison architectural dynasty didn't end with a bang, but with a meticulously prepared digital presentation. David, a senior designer who had been mentored by Olivia's father, laid out the facts for the other partners in a glass-walled conference room overlooking Boston Harbor. Ethan's father, Arthur, was there. So was Simone. So were the 10 other partners who had built their careers on the Harrison name. David was systematic. He displayed the documents on the main screen one by one, the falsified building permits, the email chain with the corrupt city inspector, the texts between Arthur and Simone detailing their plan, the Shell Corporation documents that traced a slush fund directly back to them. David never raised his voice. The evidence was screaming for him. Arthur was forced into immediate retirement by a unanimous vote. No criminal charges, not yet, but a professional exile. He was stripped of his title, his shares, his parking spot, and his corner office with a panoramic view of the harbor. Simone was informed that her consulting firm's contracts were terminated, effective immediately, and that she would be blacklisted in the Boston design community. Indefinitely was the word they used. The unspoken version was forever. A junior accountant, who had suspected something was wrong, gave a statement. She sat in a leather chair and told the partners about every invoice she had been told to expedite, every budget discrepancy she'd flagged that was ignored, and every doubt she had suppressed to keep her job. Her hands shook, but her voice was clear. Later that day, she sent Olivia a 7-word email. "I don't know if we're friends, but thank you." Olivia replied with 3 words. "You did right." That evening, Olivia sat on the shared rooftop terrace of her new apartment building. It was a small space, but from her chair, she could see the lights of the Zachem Bridge and a sliver of the sky shifting from burnt orange to the deep indigo that marked the true end of the day. She drank chamomile tea from a mug that read, "World's Okayest Chef," her free hand resting on her stomach. The baby moved, a slow, deliberate roll, a changing tide within her. She sat there for what felt like hours, not thinking about Ethan, not thinking about Simone or Arthur, or the professional firestorm that was now raging. She was thinking about nothing at all, which after a year of thinking about every possible thing, felt like the greatest luxury she had ever known. The city lights began to glow. A delivery truck rumbled down the street below. Someone laughed on a nearby balcony. Olivia found herself smiling. Not because the problems were solved. They weren't. Her life was a beautiful, chaotic, half-finished project. But she was still here, on a rooftop, with a cup of tea and a baby who was scheduled to arrive in about 4 weeks, regardless of whether the rest of the world had its plans in order. She used to think resilience was about absorbing blows, about smiling through the pain as if it weren't there. Now she understood resilience was about salvaging the wreckage and building something entirely new, something that belonged only to her, a fortress no one could betray her in or banish her from. The baby came on a Monday. Of course he did. Eliza had always despised Mondays. Marcus had dropped his confession on a Monday. She had packed her bags that Tuesday, but the baby claimed Monday for himself, and she chose to let him have it, to give the day a new beginning. The labor went on for 22 hours. It was nothing like the movies. It was a grueling, exhausting marathon, a testament to the quiet strength every woman who endures it understands. Her sister, Hannah, held one of her hands. Her best friend, Sophie, took the other. They traded places. Hannah was there for the beginning, when the contractions were just a growing tide and the room felt calm. Sophie stepped in for the active part, when the pain crashed in relentless surges and Eliza gripped her hand so hard Sophie's fingers went numb. Marcus was in the hospital. He was there only because Eliza made the conscious choice to allow it. Not because he felt entitled to be, not because of family pressure, but because she had looked at him, really looked at him, and decided. He stood in the antiseptic-smelling hallway of the labor and delivery wing, clutching a leather weekender bag filled with items he thought she might need, and in that moment, she saw a man she had never seen before. This wasn't Marcus Thorne, the celebrated creative director from Oracle Games, not the genius whose code built worlds, not the man who had torched their lives for his lead designer. He was simply a man drowning in terror, on the precipice of fatherhood, petrified of being inside that room, and even more terrified of being shut out of it completely. "You can come in," she had told him, her voice low but steady. He came in and sank into the chair by the window, a silent spectator in his own life. He never spoke unless spoken to, never offered a hand unless she reached for his, never tried to play the part of a hero. At 4:21 in the afternoon, Noah Hayes was born. 6 pounds, 9 ounces, with a plume of dark hair and eyes the deep, uncertain gray of a pre-dawn sky. His hands were so impossibly small, more like faint sketches of hands than fully formed things. Eliza held him first, feeling the dense, warm reality of him on her chest. His heart beat a new drum against hers as they found their rhythm together in the open air. She examined his miniature face, and he stared back with the ancient, unseeing gaze of a soul just arriving in, a world that was still a blur. "Hello," she murmured. "I'm your mother. I've been waiting for you." She named him Noah Hayes, not Noah Thorne. Her sister, Hannah, was the next to hold him. She settled into the recliner, cradling the newborn, and started to sing a lullaby Eliza remembered from their earliest days. A simple song their grandmother used to sing when the coastal fog rolled in, something about a lighthouse beam keeping watch. Hannah's voice wasn't perfect. It was gentle and a little fragile, thick with love. It was the only sound in the room that mattered. Marcus held him last. Eliza watched his expression as the nurse carefully transferred Noah into his arms. She witnessed the shift, the instantaneous dismantling and reconstruction of a man's soul in the span of a few seconds. He didn't say a word. He just stared down at his son, who looked back with that same boundless, unknowing expression. And Marcus started to cry. There were no dramatic sobs, just a silent, unending flood of tears that traced paths down his face, dropping onto the swaddling blanket one by one, like a steady drip from a fault line no one could repair. "He has your smile," Marcus finally managed to say, his voice thick. "No," Eliza answered softly. "He has his own." David Chen, Marcus's former publisher and mentor, visited the hospital the next day. He came by himself, his expensive blazer looking alien in the cheerful chaos of the maternity ward, his usual confidence replaced with a hesitant uncertainty. He was a giant in the gaming industry who suddenly looked lost, a man who could command billion-dollar deals now adrift in a sea of vital sign monitors and new life. He held Noah with a delicate reverence, the way someone might handle a priceless artifact. I should have done something, David said, his gaze locked on the baby, but his words were for Eliza. I saw what was happening between him and Isabel. I didn't step in. I told myself it was just creative synergy, that the pressure of the launch was blurring lines. He let out a long, weary breath. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. Eliza listened as this titan confessed his own passive failure, all while he was holding her son. I won't ask you to forgive me for my silence, David went on, but I want you to know this. This little boy is an incredible new beginning, and he will always have a friend in me. Eliza gave a slight nod. She couldn't bring herself to say, "It's fine," because nothing about it was fine. But watching him hold her baby, hearing the weight of his regret, felt like a single stone being laid for a new foundation. For now, it was enough. Isabel did not come to the hospital. She sent a package, not flowers, but a limited edition polystone statue of a character from the game, the kind that came with a $150 collector's edition and had no place in a maternity ward. A trophy from a person playing a part. Eliza stared at it. Hannah stared at it. Want me to see if this thing can fly? Hannah asked. Just get rid of it. Hannah disposed of it, but she kept the heavy, sculpted base. It worked perfectly as a doorstop. Sophie, Eliza's best friend, came that night. She brought a cherished, dog-eared copy of a children's story and a thermos of her legendary ginger tea. For the little guy, Sophie said, placing the book on the nightstand. He'll need this when I start teaching him how to properly finger paint. Because, and I mean this with love, your idea of a good time is organizing your bookshelf by color. I can be fun, Eliza protested. You're meticulous. It's a different skill set. That's what his Auntie Sophie is for. Eliza laughed. The sound felt alien in her own throat, shocking not for its volume, but for its authenticity. It was a real laugh, one that came from a place inside her she feared had been permanently demolished. In the weeks that followed, the social fallout began. Whispers and screenshots circulated through the Bay Area's tech community. Colleagues chose their sides. Slack channels went quiet, and professional relationships were strained. The methodical, ugly process that turns a private heartbreak into industry gossip. Isabel was placed on indefinite leave, a decision from the publisher that felt like a half measure, but the proof of their betrayal was irrefutable. It wasn't found on a credit card statement. It was discovered by a journalist with an early access key to the game. Deep within the code, he found a hidden developer room, an Easter egg that was a meticulous recreation of a Sonoma Valley vineyard they had visited. Hanging on a virtual wall was a piece of concept art, an intimate portrait of Isabel with a coded dedication from Marcus embedded in the file's metadata. A digital confession that was now screenshotted and archived across the internet. The narrative of their perfect creative partnership was exposed as a fraud, but this was the piece of truth Eliza clung to, the fact that kept her sane. She was never in that race. She knew nothing of Isabel's ruthless ambition, or Marcus's catastrophic weakness, or the 9-figure stakes of their project. She was not a character in their game. She was never a piece on their board. She was a woman who loved a brilliant man, who was carrying his son, who had her world shattered, and who was now building a new one from the ground up. The story of the star designer and the cheating director was a tragedy that existed on a screen completely separate from her own. She was carrying their baby, but she was not carrying the weight of their choices. She was carrying her son. 3 weeks after Noah was born, a messenger delivered a thick manila envelope to her new apartment. Inside was a stack of legal documents. Marcus had signed over 100% of his founder's shares from his first beloved indie studio, the company he built from scratch before the big acquisition, into an irrevocable trust for Noah. The trust was to be administered by a third-party firm, with Eliza designated as the sole guardian with full proxy rights. It was the total surrender of his proudest legacy, executed without a single phone call, without any strings attached, and without Eliza ever asking for anything. Slipped inside was a note handwritten on a page torn from a sketchbook in Marcus's familiar, messy scrawl. "I can't fix what I broke," it said, "but I can give him the foundation I failed to give you, and I will use whatever time I have left to try and earn back the right to be in his life." Eliza read the note at the small bistro table in her rental kitchen, Noah asleep in the bassinet she had put together herself with a YouTube tutorial and a hex wrench. Her sister was curled up on the couch, lost in a novel. The old steam heater hissed, a steady, comforting rhythm. She read the note one more time, folded it neatly, and tucked it into a wooden box that held her grandmother's recipes and a concert ticket from her first date with Marcus. She didn't call him, not that day, but she did not throw the note away. A few hours later, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Sophie. It was a photo of the old children's book, now on a shelf in Sophie's apartment next to a framed picture of the two of them in college, covered in clay from a pottery class, grinning with no idea of the lives that were waiting for them. The caption read, "Keeping this safe for the little monster. Based on his grip strength, he'll be ready to start tearing out pages by Friday." Eliza laughed again. That was 2 times in one day. A new record. She put her phone down, went to the bassinet, and just watched her son sleep. His tiny hands were clenched into fists, his mouth making the slightest of movements as if dreaming. A flutter, a tiny, insistent pulse against her ribs made Anya smile. At 7 months pregnant, their daughter was already making her presence known. The humid New Orleans air hung heavy in their Garden District home, the scent of jasmine drifting through the open French doors. She should have been resting, but instead, she was putting the final touches on the proposal for Marcus's debut cookbook. He was the city's hottest chef on the verge of national fame. Asterisk. Their asterisk dream was so close. A wave of pride washed over her as she aligned the last of the recipe photos. That's when she saw it, a synced photo album on his tablet she'd never noticed before, labeled Simply Marrow. Thinking it was research for his bone marrow tart, she tapped it open. But it wasn't food. It was a woman. Dozens of photos of Isabella, the stunningly beautiful sommelier from his restaurant, lounging in a sun-drenched cottage Anya didn't recognize. And the cottage, it was identical to the investment property Marcus had been supposedly renovating in the Marigny for months. Only it wasn't a construction site. It was a home filled with art and life. A raw, bitter jealousy rose in her throat like bile. The new life growing inside her, the future she believed they were building course by course, was just an elaborate plating hiding a rotten ingredient. Their perfect home, their celebrated marriage, was just the menu he presented to the world, while the real meal, the true feast, was being served somewhere else, for someone else. Her hand instinctively covered her belly as the baby kicked again, a sharp, urgent tempo against her skin. Their daughter knew nothing of secret albums or broken vows or the silent, cavernous space that now defined their beautiful house. All she knew was the sudden, jarring rhythm of her mother's shattering heart. She was the only part of this recipe that was true, the only creation that was entirely hers, and that would have to be everything. Final thoughts. This story was carefully crafted by our creative team to explore the complex flavors of human connection. Each character, every quiet moment, and each bitter realization was added with purpose. We see stories not merely as entertainment, but as the essential ingredients we use to cultivate empathy and understanding. Thank you for sharing this experience with us.